Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jean Renoir, and I'm the author of the picture The Grand Illusion, and I'm very happy to present it to you. Well, if today I'm able to do it, it's just because I'm lucky. The negative
I wouldn't have got out of it without Ponsard. Renoir, reflecting on his own experiences in the Great War while promoting the re-release of his film, disclosed that his personal story was strikingly similar to that of those of the French pilots in The Grand Illusion. He was a pilot just like them, taking photographs behind enemy lines just like them. But unlike the cinematic de Beaujeu and Maréchal, the real Renoir had the fortune of being rescued. He saved me. Ponsard had been shot down 7 times, held prisoner 7 times, and escaped 7 times. Sometimes, the truth invents a story.
Let the movie speak.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to episode 7 of our first series. This is called Let the Movie Speak, because we look a little bit below the surface to try to find something that it's saying. Each film, each director, each screenwriter, each story. Justin, how are you this week?
I am doing very well, monsieur. I feel like we should throw a little French into our conversation, even if neither of us are fluent.
You're a little bit more fluent than I am. I mean...
Well, yeah, I guess, as a child is more fluent than a baby in speaking English.
Yeah.
But, I'm doing well, excited to talk about this movie today, and excited we have some new folks joining us.
Yes, we're so happy to welcome our guest this week, a couple of friends of mine, amateur filmmakers, Greg and Gary. How are you doing, Gary?
I'm doing good. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And Greg?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, thanks.
I kind of wish you just ended it with, like, I'm terrible.
I was thinking about going there. Not rude.
Okay. We're so happy to have them on and bring their perspective. But before we get into The Grand Illusion and what that means, we're going to give a little preview into what we watched this week. Okay, I will say for myself, a lighter week on the watching things front, but spoiled off mic. I think me and Justin have the same what we watched this week, but I'll let Justin kick it off and reveal what that is and why it's significant.
Well, I don't know about significance, I guess you could argue, but you and I both watched at least the first episode of WandaVision, which is Marvel's first show that they have released on Disney+. I remember, Travis, when the trailer for this came out a few months ago.
Yep.
We watched it, not together, I don't think, but we watched it.
I drove to your house, and I made you press the play button.
Yeah, you said, sit down, lad.
Yeah.
And I said, why are you talking to me like Grandpappy? And you said, sit down!
I said, WandaVision, go!
Yeah, and... It looked really bizarre in a good way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I are both fans of David Lynch, and this
it's
looked...
his birthday today, by the way.
Happy birthday, David.
Yeah, at the time of recording. It won't be by the time you hear this, but happy birthday now and forever, David Lynch.
You dated it.
Yes,
yeah.
I dated it. I'm sorry.
We love you, David. We wish you good health and many more movies. And
many
weather
more
reports.
movies, please.
Yeah,
I've seen like one of
exactly.
his movies, guys.
Yes.
So... Yeah, this trailer for back to WandaVision, it just looked a little bizarre. I mean, the concept is like they're in different sitcoms throughout the ages. But then the trailer also gave us a little bit of non-sitcom-y scenes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, helicopter and, people flying through the air, kind of typical Marvel stuff that you would expect. So I think you and I agreed, okay, well, if they lean more on the sitcom stuff, this could be really interesting. But if that's just kind of a gimmick to get viewers interested, then maybe shame on them. So, having only, I think we're only discussing the first episode right now, right?
Yeah,
But
I mean, you've watched the first couple. I haven't seen the first one, but just the gist
Okay.
of the show so far, yeah.
Yeah, so I've seen the first two, you've seen the first one, and so far they are really sticking to the sitcom is what that format drives this show so far.
Yeah.
And rather than just being a kind of a weak, they're playing dress up in, sitcom land, the production, to their credit, everyone involved has committed heart and soul to making. So the first episode ostensibly takes place in 1950s kind of sitcom world, and the attention to detail in this show seems to go so far beyond
it's wild.
just the set or the the costumes or whatever. It's the way the people talk, and it's the writing is what astounded me the most, Travis.
For
that
sure.
beat for beat. I mean, these are not jokes that are written today for TV. This is the pattern. These are the jokes that are written for a show in the 50s. And then at the end of the episode, there is that kind of turn where it suddenly becomes Lynchian and all is not as it seems, or maybe Twilight Zone-ish.
Yeah, which is apropos of the black and white square aesthetic, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, even you say square, and I think even the aspect ratio is really clever. That they're not shooting this in Cinescope.
Yeah.
And it's just such a fun, bizarre world to be in. So I'm interested. I don't know what your take is, but I'm really interested in seeing where they go with this and if they can sustain the kind of. They have to kind of give you an answer, right?
Sure.
I don't expect it's going to be as ambiguous as David Lynch's work.
Yeah, that would probably upset your average Marvel fan. My advice is like, keep it weird, man. It's so much more interesting than the movie by committee that we get once a year from Marvel, which is, if it was fun for a while and some of them are better than others, like certainly there's value there, right? In like the popcorn flick thing. And they're well made for what they are, but like they are really starting to look like a movie factory just pumping out,
You said once a year.
Yeah, it's like more than once a year.
Yeah. Or I guess twice a year. They
thrice a year sometimes.
Yeah, they used to do one a year, and then they sort of started doing every 6 months, and then it was like there was sort of a free for all.
Yeah.
I stopped watching them even once a year a few years back because it was like I'm over.
I've seen all of them.
Yes, I think I've seen most of them. But yeah, I would say keep it weird. It's good when it's weird, especially in that first episode in the last 10 minutes. It gets you really comfortable because, like you said, it's really well done, really well written. If you've ever seen like Leave It to Beaver, The Dick Van Dyke Show, The Honeymooners, like it is straight out of that. I think Justin, you even told me they literally filmed it in front of a live studio audience. They went all in, and then the stuff that happens at the end, the weirdness is all the more effective for that reason.
Agreed.
It reels you in. So yeah, I'm on board for more WandaVision. Greg, Gary, who wants to go first? What did you guys watch this week? Anything good?
We watched Emma, which I think came out last year.
Yeah,
with Anya Taylor-Joy.
Right, Anya Taylor-Joy. Everybody knows that name.
Right, and so it was good. It starts out like I've seen a couple of like the Jane Austen period pieces, but it starts out pretty like funny and quirky, and then kind of the second half it gets a little bit more like conventional. But I really like the beginning at least, so it's pretty good.
Who's it directed by? Do you remember?
Gary.
Autumn DeWilde, who I don't know who that is. I think it might be her first movie,
first big like studio flick.
And it's I don't know a ton about the movie, but yeah, it was really.
When you say it started out kind of quirky, is that the word you used?
Yeah.
So, what does that mean to you? That it started? What were some things that you liked that showed the movie had some kind of maybe distinct personality or something?
There's just like little jokes.
There's this guy like Bill Nighy is in the movie, and like his whole character is like he's just like obsessed with like drafts coming into the windows, and he has like these two servants like
neurotic
move these like windshields around him throughout the movie.
Yeah,
Bill Nighy is amazing.
Yeah,
he's fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so Emma, that was like 2019 too, wasn't it?
2020.
2020.
It was like one of the last movies in theaters before the shutdown.
Yeah. Okay, and then there was another one you guys had.
Yeah, and I saw Promising Young Woman, and that was really kind of a conflicting movie. And I would definitely recommend it I don't want to say too much about it because it's kind of spoilery, but it's an experience, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of like it kind of reminds me of like Thelma and Louise, and it's kind of a bummer to me that it didn't get like released in theaters, because like I just remember watching like also like Get Out in theaters. Like I feel like those movies are kind of funny just for like the conversation, because it's definitely like kind of the same kind of movie. Like Jordan Peele described Get Out as like a social thriller, and this would probably fall into the same category. So
I remember seeing the trailer and thinking like, is it Blumhouse?
No,
okay, because
it's like Margot Robbie's production company.
Okay,
or something.
it feels like a Blumhouse movie, like from the trailer and everything to me. But that's Carey Mulligan and like a thriller kind of mystery, pseudo horror something, but not. It's not straight horror, is it?
No, it's not. Definitely not.
Okay, so that's a variance of things put on the table this week for what did we watch. I think it's time we went back in time, Justin, by what, 70, 80, almost 80 years. Holy cow.
It's time to fire up the autogyro, I think.
Let's
Take a
fire up
trip.
the autogyro that is also a time machine. I love the idea that segue included the autogyro, because if you just like pop in for this episode, you're like, what is an autogyro?
Yes.
That Chitty Chitty Bang Bang?
Kind of.
Kind of.
You're not that far off. Anyway, the autogyro has landed, folks, and we are at the Grand Illusion, 1937, French film. This is only our second foreign movie. So as much as I am fully aware, Justin, as I'm sure you are too, that, your average Joe, maybe even your average podcast listener isn't like, you know what I need? I need a podcast about movies, but I need a podcast about movies from the 30s that are randomly chosen by people I don't know.
Right.
But
that's our draw. That's our appeal.
That's it. That's why people are, in droves. They're
flocking.
But yeah, second foreign film, and the first one was Fritz Lang's M, which was
Well, I guess if we're being strict, if foreign means non-American,
Yeah.
we have to
Yeah,
throw
it's
in
called,
foreign
they're called
steps,
international films now, Travis.
fine. I meant foreign language film. Is that okay?
Well, it had English in
right?
it.
I don't know. We'll have to
It
check.
had
like
3
three
different
languages.
languages
It had
in it.
some English in it, but it's a French movie. Anyway,
We'll see if you get canceled later.
yeah, I hope so. By the French exclusively.
Yes.
So 1937, this is an interwar movie about World War I, about the Great War, right? So in our intro section here, it's worth noting that this was directed by Jean Renoir. And again, everybody, I'm just going to do my best. Justin will have the real French pronunciations for these things. But it stars Jean Gabin, and I think the biggest name on here was Erich von Stroheim. He was the draw, if there was one, from an acting perspective, as Captain Raffenstein. So any background or history stuff that we can throw it in here. This is my first time seeing this film. Justin, is this your first time seeing this film?
Yeah, it is. It is my first time, and like you, I don't think I really had many expectations at all. And just as a little preview of my thoughts, guys, I really enjoyed it. I thought this was great, and you can kind of tell what Mr. Renoir was kind of striving for. I think it comes across the screen pretty clearly, and I think it's telling. If we're talking about background, this movie is made in 1937. France is going to be occupied 3 years from then,
Right.
And I think this movie has quite a bit to say about a lot of themes, but including in maybe a more peripheral way that the rise of fascism is not something to mess around with, and is only going to end poorly. So
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I do agree. It kind of knocks a lot of pins down in the theme department. So it's tough to distill it down to one thing. I think we'll find the ones that hit us each the most will kind of rise to the surface. So that's about it for background. Obviously, the director is sort of significant in this regard. He's super prolific, and I think we also know from history, Justin, that his time in Hollywood didn't go as planned. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, so Renoir was lucky enough to escape Nazi Germany when France was getting overrun by that nation. And he came to Hollywood, and Hollywood seemed happy to have him. And so he directed some movies, and it seems like his earlier works there in the early 40s were, somewhat well received, nothing kind of landmark. Whereas like the movie we're watching today, The Grand Illusion, is regarded by different film who's and critics as one of the best pieces of cinema ever. Nothing in that he did in Hollywood had the fortune of giving him that kind of acclaim. And towards the end of World War II in the late 40s, I know that some of his films were very financially unsuccessful, and kind of the result of we were talking about the Marvel movies, right? The movie by committee.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Renoir was not spared that, despite his status in Europe. So he kind of gave up on Hollywood after the war was over, and came back to Europe to make many more films. So.
Okay, so my first time, Justin's first time, Greg and Gary first time.
Yeah.
First time. Okay, so we're all newbies to this. Let's see what it had to say. Okay, so let's get into it. We'll start with our guests and kind of see what you guys, what's your initial impressions of the movie? How did you think it was? Gary, Greg, either one of you want to start us off?
It felt kind of like episodic to me. Like I gotta be honest and say that I was kind of tired when I was watching this, so I don't think I had the best watch.
Yeah.
But I think like it did feel kind of episodic to me. It felt like certain character relationships, like they got established. I don't know if this is just because I was too tired, but it felt like they weren't like established well enough to me to like come back later and supposed to be impactful. Although I do think it worked. The theme, I guess, I felt like it was. I definitely felt like it felt somewhat prophetic in that it's like. Are we like spoiling? I guess we're spoiling.
Oh yeah,
this thing,
it's 70 years old. I think people are going to get around to it. They will. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it felt like it was like they mentioned illusion like 3 times in the movie, which is funny because like me and Greg will enter these contests sometimes. Like the theme is like it's like a 1-word theme, and like people always the entries people always like have somebody say the theme, and it's like no, don't do that.
Yeah.
But like this movie, so whenever they said that, it felt kind of like that. It was like we gotta say the theme now. It's called The Grand Illusion. Let's say illusion. So yeah, I don't know. Just the idea at the end that it's like war is kind of inevitable. And it's going to happen again. And it's like this war feels like it's going on forever, but really, I don't know. At one point, I think he says the war is going to end soon, but that's an illusion.
Yeah, a couple times that character mentions that. He's like, well, the war will be over before that. The war will be over before that, right?
Right.
That's a recurring thing.
Yeah. And they mentioned that being an illusion. And then at the end, it's kind of like ominous because it's like, there'll never be another war after this.
But
it's
this
like,
was maybe before World War II.
Right. So it's like, how early did they know that it was going to be like, World War II was going to happen when this was being made? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, this is released in 37. So safe to say, I think it's, filming in 35, 36,
Yep.
and maybe part of 37 too. So, really the war starts in, I guess it depends on how you define the start of World War II, but if you define that as Germany annexing part of Czechoslovakia, you're looking at 38, and by 39, it's just overrunning all of its neighbors, and then by 40, it's pretty much taken over all of Europe. So I think Lenoir is a little, like you said, I think prophetic is the right word. I think he's paying attention to the world around him and is seeing that, wait a minute, we just had a war not even 20 years ago, and here we are with some nation states gearing up for round 2. So I think he saw what was coming, but maybe didn't realize how soon it would come.
Yeah. So, story-wise, we've got, I don't know if you would call him the main character, but I guess a pair of main characters, really. Marechal and Boileau. These are the two guys who, they end up, from the beginning to the end, we see where they start and where they end up. You do kind of get people attached to them along the way who stick around for a while. But would you say that the kind of the center of the story, Justin, overall?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So we've got a pilot, right, in the beginning. And there's a kind of a neat trick, storytelling-wise, that I liked it's a little jarring, but like you're watching the first sequence and it's a bar, and he gets called in to talk to and he says, we got to go, basically retake some photographs of some aerial photographs because there's a spot that's unclear. And then they really just cut to another bar sort of room, like a little private area. It looks like it's in a hangar or, somewhere. And Marshall has a cast on, right? And they don't do anything like big action-packed explosions, back projection, they just tell you, and it's like they've been shot down, and it just kind of zips you right into the story and gets you to one of the most interesting characters in the movie, which is Rothenstein. So what did you think of like the first act, Justin, overall?
Yeah, I loved it, like you, that hard shift from one bar to the sort of German bar is it's kind of brilliant to me, and I think it sets the tone for what Lenoir wants to say. I think he assumes of the audience that they're going to agree with him that war is bad, and that war is not something to be glamorized, and so he has no interest in showing you that. There's no point in him showing you some battle in the trenches,
right,
or some dogfight that he probably... I mean, this guy has a real, even if this wasn't your favorite movie, I think you'd be hard-pressed to make an argument that this guy didn't know how to craft a film. And so I think he had enough maybe foresight or insight into what was possible in 1937 to say, if I do an aerial anything, it's going to look bad. and it's also not the point of the story.
Yeah.
And so I find it really interesting that this is a war movie that has no sequences of war in it. So I love the setup, and I don't know, I would agree with our guests that it did seem, this movie is rather episodic, or maybe more like a chapter book.
Yeah.
And so I would be hard pressed maybe to know where the first act ends. I'm not trying to disagree with you and be petty about nothing. I'm just saying I don't know exactly where. The movie moves to a lot of different places and involves a lot of different characters that are, frankly, I think movies that are kind of operating on this scale with this many characters frequently fall in the trap of not giving enough screen time.
Right.
If we want to bring up Marvel again, look at Avengers Endgame or whatever. It's like what is going on? There's just a gazillion characters in spandex.
Yeah.
But this movie does a really good job of, I think, doing due diligence and giving service to all of the characters. They all have an arc, and even side characters, who were introduced to, like at the first prisoner of war camp.
Yeah.
I think that kind of sets the tone too for. Every character that you experience is presented as a human being. Nobody is reduced to wooden or car. So
a gimmick,
you even
or
have
like
that, right. You even have the German guard, as they're going over the rules for, hey, this is how things are going to go in the prison camp, and the one guy is reading the rules, and the other guy, who's got this amazing German mustache from the Prussian Empire. He says, it's strictly verboten. It's forbidden, and he keeps saying it. So you get the impression that this guy is hard nosed as a character. But that's kind of the closest that in my opinion anyway, that you get to a real villain in this movie.
Yeah.
Nobody is shown to be like a Hitler or just a murderous soldier or something. They're all deeply human, and I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, it manages to humanize, all these different people of war, right? Various, ranks of military folk, and they all kind of identify. There's some talk about, oh well, he's an officer and he's not an officer, and sometimes that's a little significant, but mostly it's like, I'm a soldier. You know what I mean? They almost all refer to themselves as soldiers, and there's a clear sense, no matter which part of the story you're in, that like they're like, this is who they are now. Like war has turned them into like their identity is this, and they hate it, but they love it at the same time. There's a huge amount of conflict, some more than others. Yeah, totally. But humanized characters for sure, and I think that's helped by. The script is really good. The committed actors all around. Like, there's not a performance in here that I was like, oof, everybody's pretty good. To great, I would say. There's some really good subtle stuff. But it also asks the question not just about war or being a soldier, right? It asks the question about like people imprisoned. You know what I mean? I kept thinking about like our idea of, you know, prisoners of war or war camps. You know, I feel like if you are an American with no firsthand experience at that, the first thing you go to is like Auschwitz or something, like the worst possible.
Yeah.
You
Or
know,
Guantanamo.
Yeah, or Gitmo. Yeah, exactly. It's like these are the, you know, horrors of humanity at their worst.
Yeah.
And this is presented in a way that you know, none of this seeks to justify war or like this type of conflict. In fact, the opposite. But it does show you the people in the situations that were probably a lot more prominent a lot of the time, right? And like less commonly told, especially in that first camp where there's so many people packed into a room around a dinner table, you know, essentially just eating dinner together and having a conversation. There's no romanticizing of being a soldier and patriotism, but there's like a statement of matter of factness about all that. Greg, what stuck out to you as particularly memorable from character to theme or anything like that?
Well, you guys are talking about how they're so nice, or like the character or everyone's humanized or whatever. But yeah, like everyone in the camp is like so nice to them. Yeah, kind of like the scene in Goodfellas where they go to prison, like and like they're just, you know, making dinner or whatever.
Right. The spot that I started writing more notes on, Justin, where I immediately was like, okay, this is getting into the meat of it now. Honestly, the first probably half hour I just watched. I didn't write anything down. And I started writing notes as soon as someone said, out there children play like soldiers, in here soldiers play like children. And I think I believe that's Boidu's line. What do you have to say about that portrayal of Pierre Fresnay, beautifully pronounced on my part, as Boidu?
Just as the character, you mean?
Because he's a real through line, right? Like, I mean, he's in the first scene to the last scene, not exactly the last scene, because he really is out of the... You know, if this was Breaking Bad or like any of your modernly cut you know, movie series, that whole last sequence where they end up in a, you know, like cottage farm area with a woman, that would be like the season finale, or it would be like the flash forward that gets cut into the cold open of everything. So he's not in that section for obvious reasons. He did. But what do you think about him as a character and the portrayal?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. He is portrayed, or acted, I guess, in really masterfully. And like you, Travis, I have no complaints with anyone, Dieter Parlow or Eric von Stroheim. I mean, everyone is amazing, which I think speaks to their own talents and to the direction in this movie. But I did find that the relationship between Boidu and Raffenstein is really... that's not maybe the main thrust of the movie, but I would also agree it'd be hard to say like no these are the main characters of the movie and these are B characters. Yeah, I don't think the movie makes it that clear, and I don't think it really has the intention of doing that. And it kind of like real life, you know, unless you're a narcissist and then you're the A character, I guess. But so you have, you know, this relationship between Boidu and Raffenstein. And they kind of bond with each other because they're both from like the upper crust of their respective nations. And it's not just that, but they find out through talking to each other that they're like mutual acquaintances and they know the same people. They've been to the same restaurants. They enjoy the same sports. And so that really, you know, if you're going to have a villain in this movie, I think in the hands of a lesser writer or director, Raffenstein is the villain. For sure. Right? Because he is the guy that shoots down Maréchal and Boidu, and then he is the guy that is now the commandant because he's like disabled.
He has a monocle. Let's not forget.
He has a monocle, and yet he's not reduced to, you know, he's not Colonel Klink.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, he is a fully developed character, and I found some of the conversations between those characters, Boidu and Raffenstein, to be some of the most enlightening and some of the most human. You know, you have Raffenstein who's taking care of his one geranium flower, right? You know, it just really, really beautiful moments in there that that really, again, I think I mentioned, we talked about how this movie humanizes everyone, but it almost does more than that, if that's possible. It's like it goes beyond just saying, hey, can't we just all get along? And says, if you spend enough time with somebody, and if you have the same experiences with them, what kind of a crazy world is it that you're going to turn around one day and pick up a gun against them? If they've done nothing personally against you, you're going to do that just because the political power has told you to. And I think that has a lot to do. We mentioned how much that word illusion is used in the movie. And I later read that Renoir lifted that from a book by a British journalist, which is called The Great Illusion. And the kind of thesis of that book is that, there's no point in war, because we've all got the same. It was kind of way predated the European Union, because I think that was written just at the turn of the century there. But he was saying, look, we all have the same. We all just want to get along to get along. So can't we just do that instead of having these wars and under the guise that war is prosperous? He's saying, no, it's not. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit away from your initial question about Bourdieu and Raffenstein, but I think their relationship in particular really, because everyone else in the movie, they have relationships with each other, but it's usually within their own nation, or their own army or whatever. And these two guys totally cross that.
That's right. Yeah. And their conversations, they contain like so many thematic elements of the movie, right? Like, the thing about Raffenstein bringing up the names Rosenthal or Marechal, right? Mm-hmm. Just because of their names, there's a conversation about you could argue a couple things, right? Like it could be ethnicity or like just geographical heritage, or like class too, right? And I think the class is all the way through here because Rosenthal's wealthy, even though he's a prisoner of war, and he is Jewish, and that comes up, as being inherently tied to one another. And sometimes for the good or just the observational, sometimes for the bad, like the worst thing you can imagine, right? So they kind of dance around the idea of class, and culture clash. And also the ticking of time, right? Like they're both aging men. These are the two older of all the characters, and they have a particular conversation where, actually the ticking of time happens twice. The first one I was thinking of is you see Marechal get sent to the solitary confinement, and then you see him go a little bit nuts, which is pretty correct and true to life, right?
Yeah.
And he's screaming in there, I need to hear a voice. I need to hear a French voice. And this, again, kind German officer comes in and offers him everything he can. He offers him cigarettes. He offers him, and finally a harmonica, right? It's like, here's, just take something. And then on his way out, he's passing another guard, and the guard says, what was he yelling about? And he just says, the war's too long. You know what I mean? Like, there's this idea of like, it just marches on and marches on. And then Bourdieu brings up the idea of like class diseases, in this sort of semi-humorous monologue. He talks about, well, when you're rich, you get this disease, and when you're, middle class, you get intestinal ailments or whatever. And he says, we'd each die of our own class diseases if war didn't make all germs equal. So like his character's like the beating heart of, I think, everything the screenwriter is trying to say, what Renoir is trying to say, So what about the sequences, guys? Because I think it's clear that this is really influential, right? Like this is not the only breakout of prison movie that exists. It's not the only breakout of prisoner of war movie that exists. So where do you see influences, Gary, from this to other stuff you might have seen?
Definitely. I kind of was wondering at one point if this was like or if The Great Escape was a remake of this.
Yeah, it really does feel like it in some ways.
Yeah, well, because like just the part where he's digging the tunnel is pretty similar to a scene where he's digging they're digging the tunnel to escape the prison.
Yeah,
and then I don't know, Greg, do they move prisons in Great
No,
Escape,
it's all in the same
There's the tunneling,
there.
which is really similar, and
dirt
the
in the
dirt
garden.
that's what I was gonna say, Greg. The disposal of the dirt is like the same. You know, like dropping it kind of through the. I think they use a bag in this movie, but like they're kind of marching around in The Great Escape, and they just like dust it out all over the ground. That was exactly the same. That feel. I mean, look, like the intro said, right? Like this is culled from, I'm sure, lots of experiences and word of mouth tales. So I'm sure someone somewhere did that, right? And that's why it ended up in this movie, and then it's why it ended up in The Great Escape or whatever. But yeah, there's that.
I think at the end, right? I think Steve McQueen is like trying to drive his motorcycle over to Switzerland or something.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's what they do at the end of this movie when the guys are
Same
shooting at them.
destination.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, so I think there's definitely imprint of the escape stuff in this movie further on down the line. I thought about when he's in solitary confinement, Justin, he's like not really digging. He's just like scraping at the wall with a spoon, and the guy comes in and he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, I'm digging a hole so I can escape. And he's like losing it a little bit.
Right.
But like, isn't that the germ for like all of the imagery in the Shawshank Redemption and you know these other escape
from
movies?
Alcatraz or something like that?
That's
too.
the other one that came to mind, which is the Clint Eastwood flick. What do you think about the influence of this movie, Justin, on other stuff you might have seen?
Yeah, it's undeniable, and frankly, it's more. I mean, you and I don't claim and don't have a right to claim that we know it all by any stretch of the imagination. But based on how influential this has been, as we just discussed, at least to that genre of movies, and probably to more than that, I'm kind of surprised we haven't heard more about this movie.
Yeah,
it's just so. And what's interesting to me, Travis, is that there's other movies where things are lifted from, right? And when movies lift from an earlier movie, oftentimes they can make it better.
Yeah, that's true.
And I even though I'm a fan of The Great Escape, I'm not trying to poo-poo any of the movies that were just mentioned. But this is not really the premise of this movie is not let's have an escape movie.
Sure.
It's a part of it, but it's just done to a different end goal, I think. And so that's part of maybe the kind of futile comparison. But I was really impressed that everything in this movie stands the test of time. In the earlier episode we talked about M. That might have been our first episode, actually, huh?
Yeah, that was episode number 1.
And so that is a movie that is pretty much perfect, in my opinion, and has really, even though there's so many new modern technologies and effects and different methods of acting and things, even that movie and now this movie, The Grand Illusion, they don't seem to have lost an ounce of their potency. And,
no, I don't think so.
As much as Europe, thankfully, does not seem to be on the brink of another war again in 2021 when we're recording this, it's still a timeless message and something you can't talk about enough. I don't think you can't remind people enough that it is so much better to find commonality and to work through differences peacefully instead of taking up arms and just I think this movie points out how dangerous nationalism is.
Yeah, for sure.
Taken to any, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have any patriotism or take pride in your country or any of that. I think this movie is pointing out if you give your allegiance to a nation that says we need to declare war on those people over there, those people are bad, then I think Lenoir wants to encourage us to really consider soberly whether or not that is truth or that's a illusion.
Yeah, for sure. I will say for influences, the only thing that makes this type of movie stand the test of time is that it gives something off, right, to the next generation of films, to the next generation of filmmakers.
Yeah.
And for sure we see, I think, some really clear, sequence borrowing or details or whatever. For sure, there's that The Great Escape, Escape from Alcatraz, the escape movies. But I also thought of a couple more, even more modern ones than that, which is that whole sequence when they, Marshall and who's the guy he's with? What's his name? Rosenthal. Duh. They escape together and barely make it as comrades, as friends, right? There's a really, I think, really powerful moment where they turn on each other in frustration and exhaustion And this movie does a really good job of showing people like at their absolute lowest wits end kind of base level. But they make it to this farm. They're hiding in a shed, and this woman takes them in, which is all really interesting, right? Because they're in a prisoner of war camp, and they're treated with mostly kindness and respect and humanity. They escape it because it is prison after all, no matter how nice. They end up at this remote location. This woman, who is a German woman, right, who had German husband, brothers, and father, who all died in battle, and she names off all of those people and the battles they died in, right? And even so, she takes these two men in, and she's kind to them and feeds them and tends to his wounds and all that. She has a particular line that I couldn't shake it as far as references go, which is, I don't know how many other people here are aware of musicals like I am, but I'm sure you've heard of Les Miserables. And there's an entire number in that song called "Empty Chairs at Empty Tables," right? Well, there's a couple like lines about tables in this movie, but this specific one is when she says all the stuff. She says, "That's my husband. He died in this battle. Those are my brothers and my father. They died in these battles." And then she turns to the table and she just said, "The table's too big now." And it's empty, right? And just her daughter's sitting there. And I'm like, okay, Les Miserables came a few years later. It's about the French Revolution, and there's a whole song called "Empty Chairs and Empty Tables." It just seems like, how do you have one without the other? And in addition to that, the environment and the feel of it, especially the moment, the shot. I don't know if you guys noticed this, when they're in the house and she gives him a piece of bread and some milk, and he just takes a swig of it, and then you hear marching feet. Right, you hear the Germans marching outside, and there's this great like sweeping pan shot of everybody just going dead silent, and the room gets bigger. That moment where they're all frozen for a second in such tension, and the fact that milk plays a key scene, and we've seen the milk cow more than once, that feels like the opening sequence of a Tarantino film. I think we probably all watched, right? I think the line is, "To you and your cows, I give my compliments," or something like that.
Yeah,
From Christoph Waltz's character, the Jew hunter. And yeah, I just think like these things do not exist out of pure coincidence, right? This movie rings, I think, through a bunch of decades. Did you guys notice anything else, like technically or particularly impressive or of note?
I guess two things. Also, it reminded me of like 1917.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. In 1917, there's a part where he meets this woman, and he has like the milk with him. And then
Why is everybody drinking milk in these moments? I mean, I guess there's common drink, right? Came from a cow. It's right there. But
right.
that is interesting.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering like what you would think the parallel was there. Just movies where they kind of like, they're usually very male centric, I guess, when they're about war. And then like there's like a female, they like meet like a female character, and like they usually have like a kid, and it's like kind of like going back to like the family out there. And
because in 1917 she has a baby and she's trying to keep the baby quiet, and it is rather similar, actually, now that you mention it.
Yeah. So I don't know how that plays into the theme of both those movies, but they're also both about World War One.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting note that you make about how females are represented in this movie. While there's definitely not a surplus of them, early on in the movie when they are going to stage that kind of vaudeville show, like the Christmas show, and they get all the women's costumes. There's quite a frenzy for that, and then they have the one dude put on all the women's clothes, right, and he walks out, and the room goes dead silent. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's not any, I at least I didn't get any weird kind of like, this isn't some kind of weird, where today we'd call that like prison syndrome or something, where there's any kind of overt sexual overtone to that, but it seems much more like just a deep sadness and a despair and a longing for these guys, like, oh my gosh, I have not seen a woman in so long,
And it doesn't feel like they're like, oh my gosh, there's a woman right there. They're like, you can sense it, that they're like, that's not it, right?
Yeah,
like,
it reminds me of, but it is not.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting, eerie moment, because it's all like fun and games, and they're all like, oh my gosh. Remember, or I hear the women's hair is short now, and I hear the dresses are just below the knee now. All these scandalous things, and then that moment happens and it just dies. That's really interesting, and I think the portrayal of Elsa as a character is really good too. She has agency, right? She's
Right.
making her own choices and on her own volition, and she's really well played by Dita Parlo.
And I think Renoir is kind of masterful in showing us this. Well, and I guess the screenplay, Mr. Spock, I think, not Spock, but Spack, who wrote this. In showing that Elsa's household is the prime example of the real cost of war. Yes, it affects all the men who are fighting in it in the First World War. Of course it does. And it's not to minimize the toll that takes on anyone. But then you have Elsa at home who, like you said, she's lost every male in her life is dead and taken from her, just under the auspices that, we have to fight this war, we have to win. And now she is a widow, and she has no one left to just care for her, like you said, at the empty table with just her child. And I think that, like, if that's not gonna get you to think, maybe I should really, kind of do a double take before going to war myself for anything, I don't know what would, frankly. It's very powerful.
Yeah. As we get into our final section here, having covered some of the good and the great and the whatever, we hit a lot of we whacked a lot of moles, Justin.
I think they're all down right now.
They're pretty much
Can I
down.
whack one more mole?
Please.
Oh, get it.
I just like the.
Did you
Travis,
ever think you would come on and say, "Can I whack one more mole"?
When you were mentioning the scene where they kind of like turn against each other, that was like, I don't know. You guys kind of emphasized and recontextualized how I was thinking about this movie, and just because you mentioned there's like no battle, there's no war scenes, and there's I don't know, you kind of make me remember more of the subtlety of it, and definitely that scene where they were on the cliff was where it like really got to me, where it was like they're yelling at each other, and they're not like in a modern movie they would probably be more overtly angry seeming, but like the danger, like it's shot on like kind of long lenses. There's like a danger to that scene because they're like on this big hillside and you can just see like this like drop behind them, even though I don't know, just the way it was framed, it was like he's right next to this cliff and it's like I feel like one of them is going to go off that cliff, but thankfully it doesn't happen. So
there's tension in the visual representation of it because it's wider than it should be to make you comfortable. It's also like when you see all the land around them from those wide shots, you think like someone could just arrive, right? Even though they're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It's like if you're screaming at each other because you're frustrated and his foot hurts and you don't want him to slow you down, but then it's like, well, that's what gets you caught. After all this, you want them to find, some kind of safety. So that's an excellent observation. Justin, I have one more question before we get into is it worth your time? Tell me about the white gloves.
Tell you about the white gloves. So you're talking about when Bourdieu puts on his parade dress gloves before.
Yeah, there's a lot of fuss made about him, right? Like
playing his flute.
Yes, they're introduced to Raffenstein's character.
Yes,
there's a fuss made about them there.
Yes,
there's a specific line about them with Marechal and Bourdieu where he says, no doubt about it, the gloves, the tobacco, we've got nothing in common. And Bourdieu makes a point of wearing those to the bitter end. So what do you think the significance is there? I thought that imagery was really purposeful, but I don't know that I hit the nail on the head with understanding it.
My takeaway from that is, in the military, even today, at least in the American military, the white glove inspection is still sometimes a thing. And it's less and less, it seems like the Army, which is where I served several years ago. It's becoming less and less formal and more casual, kind of keeping in check with American traditions and cultures. But the white glove inspection is traditionally, to maybe check your service rifle and see how clean it is. The idea being, if the glove comes up dirty, it's going to be really freaking obvious because it's a white glove. But the white glove is also used for, incredibly the most opulent or the most formal of occasions, like heads of state sort of a thing. And certainly in, post-World War II, uniforms for all European nations have gotten a lot less formal. But here we're presented with these two guys who are both, again, from, the elite sort of their own aristocracies in their respective nations. And dress means everything to these people. There is a dress code for everything. You are in a perfectly good, beautiful suit, and it's like, well, I have to go change now. It's dinner time for my tuxedo. And so you have these. The dress, I guess what I'm trying to say simply is the dress code means something.
Yeah.
And the white glove, there's no way to surpass that for that era and for that method of dress, especially in military dress. If you're putting on your formal dress uniform, you're not going to have anything dressier than white gloves. Mm-hmm. And so I think Raffenstein, sipping his coffee, or what he dismisses as really bad coffee, and wearing his white glove is maybe that film trying to show us that character is trying so hard to hold on to the trappings of an aristocracy that is falling all around him, and frankly by the end of the war it's not going to exist in most of Europe, including Prussia or restructured Germany or whatever. And then for Bourdieu, he has this real sense, not of despair. Raffenstein seems to kind of despair that aristocracy is going away, and Bourdieu seems much more okay with it. And he is even willing to give his life for that, so that these men that are, quote unquote, lesser than him in social standing at least, can escape. And he sort of, I think, sees that tide coming, where these guys are, it's not going to matter, what family line I'm from, what castle I grew up in. It's not going to be the same world anymore after this war. And so I think he goes out with a bang, or he goes out with a white glove in this instance. And I think him dressing up in the formalist attire that he can is maybe the equivalent of him, even though he doesn't die immediately in that scene. It's him knowing that he thinks he's headed to his death, and that he wants to go out in the most beautiful way possible for that generation and that kind of that part of society.
It's his coffin look.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay, well, let's bring it home, fellas. I feel like we've done a pretty good cursory deep dive into the Grand Illusion, but we're gonna go around the figurative table and give our rating and review, a concise rating and review. The key question here is, how often would you rewatch this? If it's a terrible movie, you probably never rewatch it. But sometimes when it's a good movie, you don't need to rewatch it but a couple times more in your life for various reasons. So we'll start with Gary and go, counterclockwise around the world. What did you think, Gary?
I would probably need to do more research before I watched it again, because just the quote you read at the beginning made it a lot more, kind of gave me some more context into it. Yeah, probably. I know there's like a Criterion release of this, although it said it was out of print, but probably.
Yeah, where'd you watch it? That's a good question.
I just rented it on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I have a question for all of you before we finish this up. Did you have a really weird freaking thing at like an hour and 46 where there's a cut that was so obviously like an issue with the print? It's like he goes in for that like embrace and almost kiss of Elsa, and then it just goes like ring, and it. I don't know, Justin, what copy you watched where, but there's a really funky moment. And so you rented it on Amazon. I rented it on YouTube. It's probably the same. Probably the same print.
And that guys, that may be the only one that exists,
right?
Because when the Nazis came through, they said they wanted to destroy every copy of this movie because it was anti-war and therefore bad. Nazis like war. So they destroyed all of them, but then Renoir thought the movie was lost. And then when he came back to France, he found one copy, one negative that the Nazis had preserved. So it could be that on that one negative, maybe that glitch was in there.
Somebody spilled their bad coffee on the one print. So you'd watch it again, Gary, for sure. You'd watch it again.
Yeah.
And Greg, what about you?
I don't think I'm ever gonna watch this movie again, but it was good for what it was, I guess.
Okay, here's the real question: would you watch The Great Escape again?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I think
I definitely
I had kind of a shallow reading of it, but
Okay.
I think I'm just a shallow movie watcher.
I think definitely like Citizen Kane though was a movie where it was like the first time I watched it, I was like, yeah, whatever. I didn't get it. And then like the second time I watched it, I had a lot more of the context.
Yeah.
And like also seeing these kind of movies in the theater is really cool.
Yeah.
When you're able to. So if I saw it playing in a theater, I would probably try to catch it.
We would go, Gary, me and you. If it was playing at the Paramount in Oakland, we would be there for sure. Justin, give us your, is it worth your time?
Yes, I would definitely watch this again. It's worth my time. It's a movie that's very much up my alley. If you like movies that have something to say, a la the title of our podcast, then I think people would enjoy this greatly. And I'm sorry, Gary and Greg, this is the first time we've met. Sorry, listeners, the veil is unveiled. Which one of you just said you had a shallow reading of this movie?
Greg said that.
Greg? Okay. So, I mean, I just want to point out, I don't think you should feel bad about that. Like, you know, like you said earlier, maybe this was off mic before we started, you know, movies in the 30s are way, way different than the way that movies are made today. And so I don't think there's... It's like, I don't know, it's like if you read an old book or something, you know, like Charles Dickens or whatever, Robinson Crusoe, you know, you have to, there's more work involved, I guess, in getting acclimated with, you know, maybe the timing or, you know, the kind of tropes or whatever of the time. So, I don't know, I just want to, as someone that loves movies, probably no surprise, but it sounds like you guys love movies too. I would just encourage you, you know, the more you watch stuff from this era or whatever, the less weird or maybe out of sync with modern films it seems to be, at least for my money. I know that the more I watch of old stuff, the more I kind of see how it's all intertwined through history. So I hope that doesn't sound like I'm preaching to you, Greg. I'm just, you know, just suggesting that, you know, you may, if you're up for it, and, you know, not everyone is, which is fine, but if you're up for it, I think the more stuff you maybe watch from this era and beyond, the more you might enjoy it. But that being said, I guess my last comment on this, gentlemen, would be that, you know, Travis, I think you and I have talked a little bit in previous episodes about how people are all the same. And so it doesn't matter what era, what year the movie's from, we can still see themes where people are the same. And this movie delivers it in spades, but sadly, on a darker note, this also shows that people can really screw things up and make things a lot worse. And I don't know about you, but for my money, I would way rather be a prisoner of war in 1916 in any European nation that was following the Geneva Convention strictly, as depicted in this movie, versus anything that came after. And so I think sadly today, and I'm not just saying because the Nazis did bad stuff in World War II. Heck no, I'm talking about the Americans locking up Japanese.
Right.
I'm talking about Guantanamo Bay. I'm talking about, you know, extraordinary rendition that we still do today. It's the kind of decency that is presented in this movie, which is directly related to the humanity. Man, that is a goal I think the world should be still shooting for today. And if anything, while we don't want to go back to, you know, like dysentery and gangrene from 1916, I would think we probably want to go back to the way that we treated our fellow man, even under the worst circumstances. It's bad enough we're fighting a war. Do I really need to make your life more of a living hell inside the prison that you're now kept in? You know, and I think the movie suggests, no, you don't. You're still human, and that's what matters, and that's how I'm going to treat you. So for my money, I would watch this plenty more, and I expect to probably watch it again rather sooner than later.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I feel like, I liked it. I feel like I almost loved it, but the more I watch this, the more I'm going to like it. I can just tell. Like it's such a well-made movie, but more than that, what it's saying is so varied and layered and nuanced. Like the line that I wrote down and circled like as the key thing for me is the exchange between Boldu and Raffenstein on his deathbed, on Boldu's deathbed, right? There's this great exchange between them where you see the compassion of people. You see, Boldu do a very aware moment of self-sacrifice, right? To just climb those rocks and keep them distracted and just keep going. And even when Raffenstein says, please stop. Stop,
Yeah.
or I'm going to have to shoot you. Boileau says I'd do the same exact thing. They have such a ridiculous respect for each other, even in the midst of the ugliness. And then when he's on his deathbed, he comes and he says, like, he apologizes for missing his leg. You know what I mean? He's like, I'm really sorry. I shot you in the gut from, 100 yards away in the dark with a handgun, and the last couple lines that Boileau and him have is he tells Raffenstein, go ahead. It's okay. Don't feel bad. Basically, he says, carry on a feudal existence. And it's like, is he talking about like just keep being a cog in the machine? And it's like he sort of has a realization on his, like, a real deathbed, moment. Oh, and then Raffenstein says, I missed my chance. Right. So they have such a tangled, complicated relationship with war and people. And that's why they're so compelling to watch each other, because they get each other regardless of national origin. They are people of the same life, which is the life of war, and they see the bad, even though they see the duty, between to their country, and their patriotism driving all of it. And so aside from that, those are just two characters in this movie, and that's it's a great ensemble cast. You could spend an entire time just watching Maréchal and like studying him and breaking that down. For sure, I would recommend it to others. I will probably rewatch this I'll probably rewatch it like at least once a year. And again, like you, Justin, I feel like I need to watch it sooner rather than later to pick up on some of the stuff that really grabbed me. But yeah, until I feel like I get it more, it's worth turning over, I think, again and again. We reached the end of episode 7, but it was fun. Thank you so much, Gary and Greg, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was
Yeah,
a lot of
thank
fun.
you.
Yeah, loved your perspective. Next week, Justin, we are coming up on another big literary adaptation in Wuthering Heights. And we have a guest again, and it's Annie. She's coming back to give her the Wuthering Heights thing. Are you feeling good about breaking that down next week?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to top this week, but yeah, looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, we'll see you next week. Bye.
Let the movie speak.
You understand that if you do not obey my order now, I'll have to shoot.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.